All right. G'day, everybody. Yes, we're back here with Rob and Hanson. We just finished another interview just previously. We're moving on to the topic of the state of politics at the moment. And as we know, Obama has just said his farewell speech, and it's been the media has been aflare, ablaze with all sorts of interesting remarks about Trump's behavior and what he might have done in some presidential suite in Moscow somewhere and film doing it. Who knows? What is real in the media these days? It could be true. Might just be fake news. So, but what do you think about the general state of politics at the moment? Is Trump being voted in going to make a big change in the landscape of technological development, scientific development, progressive development in general? What's happening?
Well, I'm confident that futurists and pretty much everyone pays too much attention to short-term local fluctuations and not enough attention to long-term trends. So I think if you want to call yourself a futurist, you should not be getting really excited by every news release you see or every press release or local fluctuation and everything locally. And you should really be thinking about overall long-term broad trends. So if you are in a place in the world at a time that's unusual, you should expect a regression to the mean. You should expect, in general, that you will become more like what everything else has been in the past and what everybody else is everywhere else. Now, if you have really treasured how you were different, you will be disappointed in that. If you had disliked how you were different, then you will be glad. But in general, there's a lot of fluctuation across broad long-term trends. It's pretty clear that the recent big changes people are very concerned or excited about are relatively local, short-term fluctuations. That is, each US presidential election has a party that wins and a party that loses. And that move is a short-term fluctuation about over the long run. Sometimes one party, sometimes the other party loses. And which particular wing of the party or style of politician also is a fluctuation. There's a range of these things over time. And that's also what you should expect. You should expect, of course, that even your time and place could, on average, move toward the middle. So we are in a world where I think perhaps a minor majority of the world are democracies, but it's not an overwhelming majority. There's a lot of strong, central, powerful governments out there. And if you are more at the extreme of being a democracy, you shouldn't necessarily expect that to last unless you think there is a long-term trend toward democracies, and then you should only expect that on average over the long run, not in particular. So at the moment, we have a move from, a relatively progressive part of the Democratic Party dominating, which is, not only the Democratic Party, but a progressive wing of the Democratic Party was in power. And now we've switched over toward not only a Republican, but an unusual wing of the Republican Party. We're not even sure what label to give it. And that's got to be disconcerting. If you thought that, the fact that Obama as a progressive was elected was solid evidence that that's the way it would be forever in the future, you were just paying too much attention to short-term fluctuations. You got to look at the big picture, the long term. You got to expect that U.S. political power will fluctuate between the different wings of political power in the country. You've got to expect that different countries in the world will be different, and that the U.S. might drift to be more like the rest of the world, and the rest of the world might drift to be more like whatever the middle of the distribution of the world is. So that's what you should expect as a futurist, and you should, whatever is happening in the short run, you shouldn't give it too much extra weight. So many people have claimed, of course, that Trump is not only not a progressive and not a Democrat, but he's evil, and not just evil, he's heartless, or not just heartless, but he's a liar, and he's uncaring, or just a manipulative person. He's going to line his own pockets with money. He's going to start wars randomly because he just can't keep his mouth shut. He's going to just appoint incompetence to different leaders. And, honestly, hey, for each one of these things, I'll give him a little more likely chance to do it than I would another random president, because, hey, he is more unusual in these ways, and unusual people tend to be unusual in many different ways. But I can't give it a large probability. Most likely, it'll be just in the middle of the distribution. And honestly, the more you you claim stridently that he's going to be extreme, the better he gets to look by just being within the usual range of variation. If he's a 25th percentile president, well, he won't be anywhere remotely as bad as people have claimed in the last couple of weeks. So I don't really know how good or bad he'll be, but I do know he will do more of the things that the Republicans wanted, because even though he's the president, he needs the Congress to do things. And so of the things he said, if the Republicans don't like it, it probably won't happen unless it's the sort of thing the president can just do by himself.
Well,
but
my friend, the 3D printed scroll says we're all doomed. Doomed.
Well, yeah, and fine. Because there's more variance, you should expect a higher chance maybe of that, a little higher, but you should also expect maybe more, moving out of places we've been stuck. So there is this basic problem with governance and societies, which is the more that we are in a peaceful world where relatively little dramatic change, disruption happens, the more we get stuck in old institutions and ways. And Manker Olson and others over the years have talked about how when there are big wars or big revolutions, often things just got unstuck and things could be better. Ways in which people knew that things should change, they really couldn't change because there were too many veto players who locked things down and made sure things didn't change. So Trump could do some of those changes that we have all kind of needed for a while, but haven't been able to do because we've been locked down in a world where people aren't really willing to make big changes. So that's usually the trade-off of a strong leader or a new leader who's willing to do things differently. There's more of a risk of change that you don't like, wars, revolutions, etc., destroying things that were working, when there's more of a hope for actually getting unstuck and making changes that have been needed but not done.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, there has been some concern about Trump's interest in increasing increasing the nuclear agenda, I guess, building more nuclear weapons and not generally scaling back the nuclear program, the nuclear weapons program. Now, it seems as though you are smoothing things out a bit there. It sounds like to me as though you don't think there could be a high likelihood of a spike of unrest in the world leading to a dangerous outcome in the future, like for instance, at the extreme level, a nuclear exchange.
Well, there's always a small chance of that. The question is just how big is that chance now? Is it substantially bigger than it was? And I will give you a small increase in that chance. I won't give you a large increase in that chance. It still stays small, maybe a little bigger, just because any disruption is going to increase the chance of things. If nobody changes anything, if everybody keeps the same relationship with each other and the same status, it's harder to have a disruption that would cause an event like that. So pretty much any change is going to be risking things like that.
Mm-hmm. So what should we do? Is there anything we can do in order to sort of bias the likelihood of no nuclear exchanges and generally steer towards a more positive future, given the presidency in America that is being sworn in very soon?
Let me make an analogy to prejudice. So if there is in your society, say, some subset of people who on average are less smart or on average less capable or less conscientious or whatever it is, that's a weak presumption that you're allowed to have, I guess, in the back of your mind. But we prefer that in your overt interactions with people, you focus on the concrete evidence in front of you about them. And if you have a job interview, that you set aside initially these abstract concerns about their ethnicity, gender, or age, and you look at what they've actually done and the person you meet and if you're going to call attention to saying you should or shouldn't hire this person, you should mainly point to those concrete features you see in front of them. That's a reasonable attitude we have about dealing with prejudice. And I think it's also the sort of attitude you should have toward the new president, which is it's fine to, in the back of your mind, have some concerns based on overall, average rates of people who act in certain ways, but you should mostly wait till specific things happen that are specifically bad in a concrete way that you can identify, and then you should call attention to those things. And the more you're saying ahead of time you think all sorts of terrible things will happen based on just prejudice, basically, the more that other people will see that reaction, they'll start to dismiss your warnings. And then later on, when you do point to something specific, they'll say, oh, that's just those people are trying to find anything bad they can say. And I think that's a problem.
Hmm.
It's fine to be extra cautious and extra attentive because you in the back of your mind do think this doesn't smell right and that you're concerned about it. But still, wait till there are specific things that are done that seem to be bad ideas and call attention to those. That seems to be the right attitude.
Okay, let's take shape that about some bad ideas that might happen in the near term. Within the next 8 years. What form do you think they'll most likely take if anything does really bad happen? In your mind, do you think it'll be war or something like that? Or the economy going down, like having another sort of economic meltdown? What's your view on the likely bad occurrences over the next 8 years,
if
4 to 8
as
years?
with Bush, that you go to Congress and you ask for support of Congress for military action, that's the right time to be speaking for or against that military action. Yes, if there's a choice to say take off the checks on the nuclear bombs, missiles, if the button, if we're going to sort of give more local commanders discretion about whether you use nuclear weapons, you might be concerned about that. If we were going to give nuclear weapons to Ukrainian rebels or somebody else in the world who would then have discretion to use it, that's I'm just making up obvious sorts of things that you could have obvious reasons for concern about. If we're going to leave NATO, say, well, if somebody, if Trump proposes to leave NATO, well, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, well, hey, maybe NATO on average is doing good or bad, and bringing arguments up then. But, these are all the sort of things that people have thought about before and have already made arguments before. So if you think Trump's going to be crazy enough to propose stupid things, when he does, that's the time to respond.
Do you think this general swing, if it can be characterized as such, and forgive me if you don't agree, there's a general, like a swing in America and in the UK towards a more conservative, closed border, perhaps even characterized as, sort of more right-wing, Tea Party-esque development. Is this just a pendulum swing? Do you think it'll swim back in the other direction anytime soon, or do you think it's a general trend? Or is it blips on the radar that also smooth out over time?
There are different trends on different time scales and spatial scales. The long-term trend over centuries is clearly toward a more liberal, progressive direction. There's just no question about that. That's been the long-term trend. And there's no particular reason not to think that won't continue if you think the main cause is continuing. I think the main cause is wealth. As we get richer, that's just more natural. So wealth will continue to increase per person, and therefore this trend will continue until it doesn't. Of course, in the Age of M in my book, wealth per capita decreases, and at that point, you shouldn't expect those trends to continue into that era. But before then, I think increasing wealth is a reasonable thing to expect, and so we should expect these trends. But just because it's an overall long-term trends doesn't mean people can't overshoot. People get so much confidence that they've seen a recent development in their direction, and then they try to grab more than they can sustainably hold, and then there's a backlash, and that's how this goes back and forth. So, maybe if you think you'd prefer the progressive direction in the future, you should hope that the right, now that they've grabbed some control, overplays their hand. Mm-hmm. They assume they've got more support than they really had. They go too far in things that the median voter doesn't really like, and that'll initiate the next backlash back in the direction you like.
Well, arguably, I mean, a lot of people are saying that Trump did that months and months before people started voting, but still, people voted against. Well, I guess it's weird how he won. I guess he won on the state level. The amount of voters, I believe Hillary had more voters in favor of her.
Right.
But in any case, Trump did seem to fool a lot of people making predictions about the outcome of the election there.
So people were surprised by Trump and Brexit, and that's in part because of the cultural split in both societies, which is that most of the media and the rich professionals live in the major cities where they talk to their friends and other people they know. And, that's the impression they get. And because they dominate media and major institutions, they kind of discourage the other people from expressing their views as frankly as they would And so there was a sense in which what people heard was that, you know, there were only some extremists who didn't like sort of the major direction people were going, and so they sort of misjudged how much disaffection there was. And I think it was exaggerated by the fact that the dominant media were so dismissive of Trump and the people that supported him that helped push him over the edge. That is, even I read the Washington Post every day because I'm here in the Washington D.C., and even I sort of, you know, I resent really the way that the Post so obviously like favors the liberal side in how it reports and how it covers things, that, and I could be tempted just to vote for Trump, just to tell them to hell with you. That, you know, and I wrote a blog post about that a while ago. That is, there's so much sort of, you know, lecturing, basically, you know, smug, sort of arrogant, self-righteous lecturing about how the left point of view and progressive point of view is better and more right, et cetera, than the right point of view, and how Trump is so beneath everybody and how nobody should like anything that anybody likes about him. That I think people just said to hell with you. I wanted to express that, hey, there's another part of the country that doesn't get heard as much, and they want to be heard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How much veracity do you put to the claims that the CIA is making, or the intelligence community is making, regarding the Russian influence in steering the outcome of the election, or biasing people?
Well, there's, I mean, I take sort of a free speech stance on this. That is, if you were going into ballot boxes and changing the vote numbers, that's a really illicit way to influence an election. And so we should really, you know, react strongly to anybody who's just messing with our elections by changing the ballot box. If you mess with our election by saying things, by speaking words that are true to influence an election, well, that's a perfectly reasonable way to influence an election for anybody, including foreigners. And so yes, I believe that Russians tried to influence the US election by collecting information and telling it to people, and true information people seem to have accepted it as. And I don't think of that as illicit influence. I think that's the perfectly reasonable way that all elections should be influenced, is by people learning true things and telling them to voters, which might influence how they vote. So I don't at all think that somehow countries should stay out of other people's elections and not try to influence other people's voters by not telling them true things about the people they're thinking of voting for.
Mm-hmm. If they're true things. And I guess if they're represented in such a way that will be consumed in the right way. I mean, like, it's information, but presented to people in certain ways. It influences the way in which people perceive.
Well, of course, that's the standard problem with politics in the country, of course, right? So the question is, in an election, different people say different things supporting the different sides, and how do we police unfair or untrue or misleading statements? And we try to punish untrue, misleading statements when it's really clearly untrue or misleading, but it's really hard to be really clear. And so within an election, we do have people saying somewhat unfair things, somewhat misleading things in elections, and we warn people, hey, that's going to happen in an election. You should listen to people with awareness. That's the nature of democracy. We don't know a better way to really enforce what people say in an election other than rules like that, but that should be the same rules on the international stage. Mm-hmm. If we can nail you on saying a lie, then we should really, really censure that. But beyond a clear lie, it's, you know, buyer beware.
Mm-hmm. Okay, a couple of direct questions. Will Donald Trump be impeached before he finishes his presidency?
It's quite unlikely. You know, again, there's a chance that he will just do some really weird, stupid stuff, but probably not. Okay. You know, again, think more the 25th percentile for presidents, not the 2 percentile.
What do you think the likelihood of him getting a second term?
I would go with the prior, whatever, you know, the fraction of presidents who have gotten second terms over the last 50 years is probably what, quarter, third? So I give that to him. Got a similar chance of everybody else.
Okay. So you're not really you don't see any particular features of Trump as being overwhelmingly strong enough one way or the other to bias the likelihood beyond the mean of him getting a second term?
Well, the major thing that I know about Trump is he took an intellectual style or conversational style that was low class. It really pissed off the upper classes because he did not act presidential and taking the upper class style of conversation and discussion and being pompous and big words and serious, and he's willing to take the low class style. He's more of what you'd see in a World Wrestling Federation sort of pre-trash talking sort of style. That's a style that the lower classes in our society are comfortable with and understand, and that's how they read him, and that's what we know about him. Now, many people, they basically don't like low-class people, and they think that if anybody were to talk like that in their world, they would just shun them and get rid of them and not want to associate with them, because that's just the low-class person they don't want to associate with. And that's what you're seeing, is basically class prejudice.
Low information voters is what people sometimes refer to them as.
Sure, but of course, pretty much all voters in an election are lower information. But yes. But they don't have the sort of information that high-class people think you should have about an election. And again, so I mainly, this is a kind of a class division. And of course, on average, I would suggest that in societies, I would probably prefer upper class people to win than lower class people on average, in terms of just pick a random person. Who do you want in charge? I'll probably have to pick an upper class person, but I don't think I want to have a strong prejudice. That's not a strong indicator to me. It'll be a pretty weak indicator, and I'd want to look at other particular things. So that's the main thing we know about Trump, I'd say, so far, is he's just taken this low class style of, which of course is partly to win the election, right? He was trying to appeal to that base, and he credibly signaled through that style he was one of them and would represent them, which is why they voted for them and didn't vote for the other dozen Republican primary candidates who were conservative but weren't going out there and representing that class.
So what are people missing? What in a nutshell, what do people have to think about? Why were people so, I guess, surprised?
Well, the thinking should have been done.
Moving forward in the future.
It's too late to think now, really.
Well, not. Well,
before the election, you should think about who to vote for. And then now you should just wait for specific things to complain about if there's going to be specific things you don't like. Generic, high-level complaining, it's not the right time for that. It's not really the right time.
Another 4 or 8 years, people will have another chance to vote in who they want.
Right, but look for specific things they do now that you could object to and oppose those for the specific reasons that you think they're bad ideas. And then 4 years from now, we can have a big, grander conversation about which style of person or which style of the country should be leading, etc. And at that point, we can point to the same issues we've had before about the different parts of the country and who's treating who fairly, and etc. But we can also point to the track record of what's happened in the previous 4 years and whether it was good or bad.
Okay, so we seem to be, it seems as though we've been talking a level of American turf. What about globally? Do you think America electing Donald Trump as a president will have
similar issues are playing out? Right. There are these different factions, and some of the factions are people who are in rural areas, who are older, who are less ethnically diverse, who are concerned about the money and attention going to the center cities in terms of government, in terms of accepting immigrants, and there's a lot of concern around the world. That faction of people has felt left out, felt neglected, and they are asserting themselves and then getting sympathy, and that will continue to happen for a while. And now we'll see basically when those people govern, what do they do, and do they overstep? Do they end up making people dislike them? What do they do? You're going to have to accept that around the world, a number of these people will be in charge some places, and just see how it plays out. Be ready to point to whatever track record of things happen that you do or don't like. But it's kind of too late to say they shouldn't have any place in charge. They are in charge in Britain and in the US and will be in some other places. And now it's the time to watch and see what they do.
Okay. If you were going to move to another country, which would it be?
Oh, I might go to China.
Good one.
Well, just because things are happening there, right?
I'm in Hong Kong at the moment. Would you go to Hong Kong or Beijing or Shanghai?
My guess is Beijing or Shanghai. I don't actually know the difference very well, but I don't really know anything particular. I just know it'd be more interesting to be where things are happening. Clearly, people are more willing to take chances in creating new industries and new technologies, things like that. They're more open to just trying new things out. Now, yes, it's less democratic, and there's more corruption, perhaps, and lots of negative. And I don't know the language. I don't know people very well don't have a set of connections, and so those are things that would put me off. But if I was just going to move somewhere, I'm more interested in change and seeing what can happen if we try new things out.
Awesome. Well, I guess, yeah, at the end of this, is there any other points you wanted to cover that I didn't bring up during this conversation on, the state of politics at the moment?
I guess I'd want to just draw to this larger picture that I alluded to before, which is, but didn't say much about, which is just, when we look at societies and we look at the variation in values, there are two main axes of variation we can identify. And one of them is really a left-right sort of dimension, which is liberal conservative. And it really, at the international level, maps onto rich versus poor, which is partly why I think it's caused primarily by increasing wealth at the social level. That is, over time, countries have been getting richer and they've been getting more liberal. And within countries, we also have that same sort of variation. It doesn't, within a country, map so much onto rich versus poor. But that's a trend we should expect over the long run, continuing that direction as we continue to get rich. There's this other dimension, which is more communal versus individual dimension of societies. So US is on the end of individualistic, say Russia is more on the end of communal, end of the spectrum. And that's also important within societies. There's also that dimension of, and also in personality, individual value variation. And so if you want to step back and take the big picture, say those are the two main dimensions of value that you should know about. You should identify where you sit on those spectrum and think about, where you sit, where your country sits, where your, church and workplace sit on those spectrums, and then think about what you should expect in the long run for those parameters. And for the long run of the one that's basically correlated with wealth, you should expect it to move liberal because we get richer until, say, with the age of M, we don't. And then we should expect society to move back to a more conservative, stance on that axis. And then on the communal versus individualistic, it depends on sort of which parts of the world win. So we had a movement toward individualism as the individual society were winning first, say in the early 20th century. But more in the last half century, it's been the other part of the world that's been growing faster. And so, they've been winning in a sense because the more communal societies have been growing faster in the last half century. And in the future, it depends on which of these societies succeed and win, and therefore sort of induce others to want to copy them. And that's more open. And that's, to me, again, I don't want to focus so much on the short-term fluctuations as to see the big picture, and then you can frame our local movement in this bigger world. So yes, the recent elections of Brexit and Trump are more a movement in a more conservative direction, but they're also in a number of other axes. But it's a small change in the big picture.
Well, in Obama's farewell speech, he did allude to a lot of optimism, saying we're living in a good time. If he were to pick a time to be alive, it would be now. He did seem to be a bit cautionary about losing our ability for democracy. But despite there are a lot of negativity, he's saying, well, it's great to be alive. Do you think it's a great time to be alive? If you were to choose. Yeah.
This is the dream time. I have a blog post on that. And yes, it's good to be rich. And it's good to be in a rich society, and a rich society with as many things as ours does. And I don't think it can change that much in 4 years either way. Whatever you're concerned about, watch for it. When something goes wrong, be ready to stand for it. But honestly, in terms of many of the freedoms or things that we hold dear about our society, we've been losing a fair number of them over the last decade, even with progressives in control. We've had a lot more involvement in wars. Police are getting more powers. There's more surveillance. There's more ways in which the government gets more of our records. And that's all been happening under a progressive government. And so many of these things, I think you should just be watching out for the things going wrong and talking about them, whether it's progressives or conservatives in charge of the government.
I mentioned earlier too that I thought it would be kind of poetic if we were living in the best time, if it was the best time to be alive now, but we were on the wrong side of the great filter, it would be, kind of wickedly poetic.
Well, if somehow we destroy ourselves, the history will be just before we destroyed ourselves, things look pretty good. And then they didn't. Of course, that's the collapse story.
And yes, The oracle have the last laugh. So smile, everybody. Yorick 2.0. So yes, the silver lining in the mushroom cloud is there'll be no one else to worry about things anymore.
But most likely, if there's a big collapse, there will be some people left and will come back. I mean, the scenario to worry most about is everybody dying and nothing happening after that. That would be the scenario that we want to prioritize avoiding. But most likely, if there is a big collapse, there will be lots of people left, and there will be stories to tell about the slow rise from the collapse.
Yes, I guess I hope that that's the case. That's a problem. I mean, global catastrophic risks are a lot less worrisome than existential risks. That's true.
But they're a lot more likely.
Yeah. Are you? Yeah, I guess by definition they are. But still, I think there's cause to be worried about extinction.
Sure.
Now, there's been a lot of predictions about like whether there's intelligent life in the universe. Recent sort of speculations on what Tabby's star really means and what the observations there mean. A lot of in a lot of people's minds means that there's some dudes building Dyson Spheres or Matryoshka brains. Have you any do you think that that's happening? I don't.
It all comes down to your prior. Now, there's a lot of phenomena out in the universe. It's a high dimensional space of phenomena features, and there'll always be recent observations of something that's weird. That's something that doesn't fit into the previous categories of things we've known about. And when you first find out about it, it's weird. Now, if you asked if there were aliens out there, what form would you first see them in? Yes, you would most likely first see them in something that looked pretty weird compared to other things. So if you have a high prior that there are aliens out there and we're about to find them, then as soon as you start to see weird things, that's where you focus attention. You say, I wonder if that weird thing is an alien, because anything weird is a candidate for being an alien. Now, if you say, yes, but it's very unlikely there are any particular thing as an alien because we haven't seen any so far and they're probably a really long way away, then your prior is really low that any weird thing is an alien. And that's where I'd say, yeah, you should be looking. And if you were thinking about aliens, that you should be looking at those things. But honestly, the odds are pretty low that any one weird thing you see is an alien.
Getting back to Tong, there's been certainly a lot of headlines in the last year, and it's been crazy. Do you think it could be crazier in 2017? Do you think the media could be a lot more sensational? Do you think there'll be a lot more concern about things in 2017?
You should just generally expect a regression in the mean, unless you see a process causing a trend away from the mean. So if you just see fluctuations in how crazy things are over years, and some years it's more crazy and some years it's less crazy, then even right after a pretty crazy year, you should expect it to get less crazy. Not all the way back maybe to the median, the middle crazy if there's some correlation in years, but usually you should expect things to go back. Of course, you should be concerned if they not go back, and if you see a consistent trend away from what you thought the middle was, you should look for a theory to explain why maybe there's now a new trend, and that's what you should expect. But I don't think we really have any particular theory that says why there's an increasing crazy at the moment. I have been concerned that the United States has been an extreme of partisan rancor and disagreement across history and across the world in the last few decades. And that seems to be an upward trend. And so I guess that's the trend I'm most concerned about, is the increase in partisan rancor. And many people, of course, and that's increased, of course, with the election now. Some people seem to think that if Hillary had won, we should have then had less partisan rancor because everybody would have said, the good person won. And so there's anything to complain about. But if Trump wins, then we should all be complaining because he's the bad person who won. Of course, that's a pretty partisan point of view. But nevertheless, clearly, the surprise of Trump winning has increased partisan disagreement with Brexit as well. And so we are still on an upward trend of partisan disagreement. So I expect weekly that we will have more partisan treatment within our institutions, within companies. People will not want to hire people of the other party. Within academia departments, they won't want to hire people of the other party. Even in the military or medicine, I just expect in the short term, politics is now invading more of the rest of our social relations, and people will more choose not to have friends or lovers or employees, etc., who they have political differences with. I would like that in the long run to go back to the mean of Because, you know, in the long run, in most places, it's relatively weak effect. But recently in the US, it's pretty much stronger.
Mm-hmm. All right. No worries. Well, yes, it's been great again. If there's any other concluding remarks you'd like to make, then
No,
now's
it's
the
been great
time.
talking to you, Adam.
It's been fantastic, Robin, and signing out from Hanson Robotics. And
Bye, Skull.
bye. Say goodbye to Yorick. Goodbye. Yes. So it's been awesome. All right. Well, alas, poor Yorick. I knew him well, and let's hope he doesn't have the last laugh, the last smile. So
Ha ha
signing
ha.
out. Thanks heaps, Robin. Speak to you soon.